GRIME originally came out in 2021 and was what could be described as a Soulsvania, developed by Cloverbyte Studio and published by Acapara Games. It does a load of things that other Souls games don't do, which makes it significantly more accessible for almost any type of player. If you're someone that finds Souls-likes frustrating, well, as you're going to find out, GRIME actually does a lot, while still being just as difficult as some of the greats. Unfortunately though, it's frustrating in other ways, as we're going to find out, so make sure you stick around to the performance section. Did Studio Clover bite off more than they can chew on Switch, or does it make a clean transition? Well, my name's Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp. Now, let's find out. It makes sense to start off with performance. Now it targets 30 frames per second, but unfortunately it does not maintain that. The main issue here is the frame pacing. As you can see, you'll notice some stutters in the movement. This persists in almost every aspect, and it's a real shame because it does seem to be able to maintain 30 frames per second, but its wonky frame pacing makes it feel like it isn't. Aside from that, we've got the visual quality. Now I wouldn't say it was a stunning game at release, but it was 60 frames per second and it had some nice lighting effects. Now here on Switch we have downscaling in almost every aspect. Texture resolution looks very bad. Sometimes it almost looks like the textures are missing from certain elements. Now in its defense, originally it did have quite low res textures, or at least a low poly art style in some of the background textured areas, but I think it's fair to say that it's seen even more of a downgrade on Switch, to the point where it looks downright bad in certain places, with a customary coat of Vaseline on a lot of the aspects that should look nice. Artistically, there is actually a lot to like. I love the way the rubble and rocks are drawn into the protagonist and form his being, particularly at the start of the game. One of its key mechanics, the absorb move, sees you drawing in the mass of your enemy. These moments look very cool, and the designs of your foes, I think it's fair to say, are unsettling. There are NPCs in the world who you can speak to. They have sound effects associated with them, but they aren't voice acted. And imagine if Rocky Balboa fought Mr. Potato Head. Well, one of the key ones looks pretty much like the outcome of that fight. The soundtrack is fantastic. There's no two ways to say that, and that has carried across nicely. From the menu theme tune to some of the more melodic moments, it has one of the better soundtracks in its genre. Also the sound of your weapons, parry move, and the enemy's grunts, as well as walls crumbling, they do a lot to try and redeem the otherwise muddy visual. In handheld, it's the same experience really. There's just a lot of work to do as far as performance is concerned. Load times, they're also very long. In fact, they're so long I thought the game had crashed on initial boot. You may also see a couple of loading stutters, but that's really the frame pacing. But as I'm sure you can see in the footage, artistically it actually is saved by some nice lighting effects and environments that contrast really well. It's playable, but that frame pacing does affect gameplay. So visuals and performance right now, that scores 12 out of 20. Sound and audio scores 18 out of 20. I alluded to this at the start, but gameplay has a number of interesting twists which in my opinion make it more accessible and potentially more enjoyable while still having its hardcore status. You move around the world in a rather lethargic way. The character's quite slow, although he can perform a dash move in the direction you're facing, or by staying still and pressing the same button, he'll dash backwards, allowing you to evade attacks. Enemies, while initially quite ponderous, can hit you in a number of ways. The first of those are your standard attacks, and these can actually be absorbed. What's absorbing? Well, it's exactly as it states. If you time it, it's a move that amounts to a parry. You actually absorb the mass of your enemy. This fills a bar, which then allows you to heal up. But we'll get onto that in a second. Now, aside from your parry move, you've got a light and heavy attack. All of these use up your force points, which amounts to this game's version of stamina. And if you've played any Souls-like game ever, you're going to be instantly familiar with this combat mechanic. Do a few swings, dash through your enemy, and then try and avoid those red attacks, which are unblockable. You'll find a number of consumable items along the way, such as throwing knives, and these can be equipped to your D-pad buttons. The absorb mechanic mechanic's also used in boss battles, and it's a really clever risk-reward system because sometimes you'll need that bar filled up so that you can have a heal in the bank, but trying to decide when it's the time to absorb, when there's going to be an unblockable attack, and whether you should just all-out attack yourself and go on the offense, it makes for some really interesting gameplay. Throw in one of the best things I've seen in ages. If you die, well yes, you'll return to the last surrogate. A surrogate is, well, it's a gate. Its name, it refers to the fact that it literally births you. It's all pretty gross, but it's also the area where you can spend the points you've gained. So what happens then is you lose half of what's known as your ardor when you die. This is essentially a multiplier of your mass. Now it might sound confusing, but you gain mass by absorbing the enemies, and this is your currency. Imagine souls in Dark Souls, and it's this which you use to level up your traits and upgrade your weapons. Now here's the kicker, you only lose half of your accumulated ardor, but you don't lose any of your mass, or your items, or your progress when you die. So if you gained a new weapon, you'll still have it. Plus you'll have all of the experience you gain to level yourself up, so no journey is ever a waste, and that's not something you can say for almost any other Souls-like. That mechanic alone opens up this experience to a much larger audience, and I've got to say I think it's great. It removes so much of the frustration of not knowing whether you should push on that little bit further, while still keeping some of the risk in the fact that you can return to that corpse, destroy it, and gain back the Ardor multiplier. It's really clever. Now the environments themselves, they're quite vast with a large mapping system which you unlock by discovering beacons. These essentially fill in the blanks. There are lots of hidden areas, secret doorways, and optional passages that will lead you to discoverable items, all the usual things you'd hope to find within this type of world. Traversal around it is reasonable. Having just played Prince of Persia, this doesn't feel nearly as fluid as that game, while still actually having a lot of the same mechanics. You can climb up certain surfaces, grapple up the edge of a ledge and pull yourself up, but it is slower paced and it's slightly harder and definitely a little less precise. The boss fights are absolutely crushing. You will be destroyed over and over again, but as I say, knowing that you're gaining experience, it was a smart choice. There are lots of different items of equipment, such as different armors that you can apply which have effects on your character's stats, but it's the weapons that will make the biggest difference. These are tied to one of 3 different statistics, such as strength or dexterity, and will scale based on those stats. They're the usual suspects, from vast heavy clubs to swift dual blades. You can equip any 2 to your character and then quickly switch these with the press of a button, but one of your most potent weapons is that absorb move. As far as gameplay negatives, for me it comes from the speed with which the protagonist moves. It's just a little bit slow. Some of those animations are a little lethargic. Thankfully the dash move is really nice, and the timing window for the parry isn't too unforgiving. It just takes a bit of getting used to. Now for me, I would say gameplay, it scores 17 out of 20. The controls, not quite as good for me. They score 15 out of 20. Grime is currently on sale at £20.24 with a 10% reduction, and that goes on until February the 1st, but its RRP is £22.49. It is an excellent game, and it also does come with all of the DLCs and added content since it first came out, with the latest of those actually coming out in January of 2024. If you enjoy a difficult experience that doesn't punish you, then you're going to get a lot of value out of this one. Still, the frame pacing does affect gameplay slightly. Once fully patched up, this will be much higher, but right now, value scores 14 out of 20. So there we have it. Right now, I think Grime on Switch needs a bit of a wash, but mechanically it's really interesting and gameplay wise a very fun experience. It gets a SwitchUp score of 76%. Thanks to the developer for the review copy. I hope you guys can get it all patched up, and I'll of course feature it in our All Patched Up series if and when you do so. Thanks to our Patreons, our members, and all of you that enjoy the content. Make sure you click the buttons, let us know in the comments what you think, and as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!